Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it may be. Um, so this video is a one-off. It's not really a part of any of the series or anything. However, I did have a comment on one of my other Just the Tips from, it looks like Mircea Zaharia. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Who says, I really need some good tips on how to organize and actually write a story, preferably from as many sources as possible. So, on the just how to write a story, and really in all this, I'm really just telling you what I do, what works for me. I've gone to school, I've um, paid probably over my life thousands and thousands of dollars on how to programs and creative writing courses and retreats and all kinds of stuff, programs and books and what I've discovered is normally all the people who produce this stuff don't write, or this is their way of getting into writing. I'm doing it because I'm telling the stories, and I want you guys to be encouraged enough to um, tell stories of your own. Uh, so that's why I have the just the tips. Otherwise, this would just be an audiobook, original fiction channel. Instead, I try to give what I've learned so people don't have to go spend those thousands and thousands of dollars. So on the writing part of it, number one rule is to just sit down and write. Write a lot, every chance you get, and read. Read a lot. Read as many things as you can from as many genres as you can. But if I were starting out and starting over, I would start with Aristotle, uh, Plato, Homer, um, and then get into more contemporary things like, or get into like the medieval Renaissance period and do Shakespeare and so on and so forth until you get to the Americas, and then do. That's where you start spreading off. I would very much encourage Steinbeck, Thoreau, that sort of thing, but also all of the genre stuff, because most likely if you're listening to this, you want to write genre stories or something similar. Um, so that's rule number one. You sit down, read a lot, write a lot. Now, in a lot of those older things like Aristotle, Plato, Homer, Socrates, even Shakespeare, I grew up, that was my mother's milk. So for me, that stuff is second nature. But I've been told that Shakespeare in particular is hard for people to get. So when you read these things, really, I would suggest reading them at the surface level first, going through them, and then going back and studying what they're actually saying and the meaning. Carl Jung is another good one. The Red Book is, that guy knew some stuff. It's like almost like he spoke to God. So do that sort of thing, and read things that you don't think you're going to like as well. Like if you've heard something is bad, read those so that you can understand what good and bad is in your own mind as you go. The only other tool or thing I can give you is this. Um, William Strunk Jr. and E.B. White's Elements of Style. And yeah, that's Elements of Style, and that's E.B. White as in Charlotte's Web. Okay, it is on Amazon, and as you can see, it's not a very thick book. It's just, and let me just open up here. The very first rule on style, right? And it's usage. All right, here we go. I'm going to read you a little bit of the introduction. This book aims to give in a brief space the principal requirements of plain English style. It aims to lighten the task of instructor and student by concentrating attention in chapters 2 and 3 on a few essentials, rules of usage, and principles of composition most commonly violated. Okay, so the first part is this introductory. So the second part, elements of usage, rules of usage, form possessive singular of nouns by adding apostrophe s. So it's grammar, it's how to use the grammar the most efficient way possible. It gets into story where it says you must, if it's not a part of the story, get rid of it. If it doesn't matter to the story, get rid of it. Now, I mean, there are a lot of ways you justify things. But if you're truly being honest, when you go back and you do your edit, there's going to be a lot of content you're going to end up cutting, if not clarifying. So that's what I would do. Now, as what I tend to do, we're going to work on something here as far as organization goes. So let's get into the organization aspect of this, which is going to be, I start off with a Word document. Okay, let me just share that. Present, share screen. We're going to go. This one. Okay, so we're going to start here. And I've got a story idea. It's called, and this is more political, but it's called The Writing Candidate. Let me see if I can make this big. There we go. All right, so I titled it The Writing Candidate. So now this is going to go two different ways. There are two types of writers commonly. Let me just get myself out of this for just a second. There are two styles of writing a story. The first style is to plot it out. In other words, what you're going to do, for those of you who may not know, what you're going to do is it's this old thing. And then you do, when I did plot out, what I would do is each scene was its own heading. You know, let's say starts with a ending of a trial. And then, you know, you tell stuff about it. And you know, the rules of outlines is if you have an A, you have to have a B. If you have an I, you have to have an II, et cetera, right? So, and then action stuff. Okay, so that's how you would plot it out. Now, the outline itself is a form of that organization to keep a linear structure of your story. Okay, what I tend to do, let's just get back out of this here. What I tend to do is I start writing. I imagine myself as my main character, and I try to imagine what kind of person he is. Okay, so while I'm doing that, I'm just writing. But the second thing I do is I start an Excel document at the same time, right? Now, this particular story is only going to have a couple of characters because for the YouTube channel, I write mostly short fiction or very short fiction, right? So this is actually for a longer story, a setup. It would probably make a pretty good script. So what I do is I go into, let me get that screen. All right. So what I tend to do is I'll have a sheet. One would actually be characters. I actually know it wouldn't. This would be synopsis. So basically, it'd be the premise that I started with, right? Sheet 2 would be characters. And then sheet 3 would be notes, right? So for example, I would make this one just one big one big one big piece of writing format. So I'm really, this is where my OCD comes out. I might be a cluttered person on my desk and things, but I have tremendous OCD when it comes to this sort of thing. So when I'm writing, I want it to be, and as you guys are aware, I really hate this. I hate that they changed it. I got to go back in here. I recently had to wipe my computer, but I did have my normal template as Courier 12 point, right? Wanted to reset on me. I clicked the wrong button. Okay. And then it's not font I want. It should let me. No, I'll do it later. Okay. So this one is actually, we'll switch these out. This is the problem with doing things on the fly like this. Okay. So here we go. All right, in the synopsis, story is basically, well, because if you plot, you already you build everything in the outline, right? So you know point A, point B, point 3, all the way to the ending. You already know where it's going to go. And that's a hard and fast rule. That's why you use an outline, is to make sure nothing goes off course. The way I write, which is the alternative, remember I said it's going to go one of two different ways. I'm a pantser. So what I do is I create, I have an idea for a situation. And the situation here is that a convicted tax evader is elected president as a write-in candidate. All right, so I had a story a while back that was called Death and Taxes, I believe. It's on the channel. I might link it below. And basically, it was the idea that if you chose not to pay your taxes, it's not a death sentence. I mean, I've thought about not doing such a thing just because I don't believe in what we're spending that money on. I believe they've become so corrupt and not even any single party, just politicians in general, government in general, is so corrupt that they're just taking our labor from us to do with whatever they want to do, whether that's funding or flying on their jets to here. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I wrote a story to express that, because as writers, we can tell stories instead of breaking the law, right? So the story gets out, his big speech gets out. That's why I'm going to start this kind of at the end of that trial where he's convicted, where he has that speech. Maybe I'll rewrite that and include it because that kind of sets it up. But the idea is that now I've got my situation. Okay. So I want to create the characters. So I have 3 categories. Main character, secondary, okay. And then I might put Jake Smith is our catalyst. And then secondary character would be whatever lawyers and stuff going on. Informing him what's happening, that kind of thing. Judges, etc. Now you would list them all the way down. And then the tertiary characters would be like guards, reporters, etc. And then we would have an antagonist of some kind, whether that be a situation, whether that be somebody who absolutely opposes the path that the protagonist is taking. It doesn't have to be a character. Like I said, it could be a situation where, yes, technically, legally, this happened, but there's other rules in place that kind of make it impossible for it to work and things like that. I don't know. I have to do research. That's the other thing. You're going to want to add, if it gets too complicated, you're going to want to add research. Okay. Now, that being said, let's go back to characters. Once you get these lists, then you would go over here and you would block off a certain amount, say, and do descriptions, like a character sheet. Anybody who's played any tabletop role-playing game would know how to create a character sheet, where it has name, physical attributes, hair color, eye color, personality traits, issues, things that may have happened in their past that give them motivations, things like that. So it's kind of a cheat sheet on your characters. And that's what I do, is I list them in here. Okay. Notes are like scenes you want to see, ideas you had about how a conversation might go, things like that just pop into your head, places you don't want to take the story. So if you see it going that way, maybe you can guide the characters back, because in truth, the whole idea of being a pantser is that you let the characters, you make the characters as believable as you possibly can. That's why I'm focusing so much on the character part of this, because that's just my natural tendency. I just realized I was doing it. But you want the characters to be just almost like people would recognize the archetype as somebody they knew. Okay. And then you let that personality type, what would that type of person do if confronted with a major choice? And you take the choice based on what the character would do, and that leads the story away. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have guide rails, kind of like those things that pop up when kids are bowling. And that goes back to the outline. So I write a little ways, get the notes taken care of as I go, writing the story paragraph by paragraph, and I go, okay, it's starting to go a little off the rails, so let me go back and outline what I've got so far so I can see it. Outlining after the fact lets you see what you're doing, right? Because you don't have to have the level of detail you do in the prose. In other words, the narration and the dialogue together as prose. So you want to do that, but you only want to concentrate on one section at a time. Okay. So your outline is not going to be a formal outline, and it's not going to be a pretty outline like a plotter may do. It's going to be disjointed. You might have 2 or 3 different outlines, depending on if you're doing a chapter or you're doing them by scenes, etc. So you can actually drill down the outline as far as you would like. So that's what I do. Now, that being said, if you organize in such a way, it's going to be almost impossible. Let me bring myself back in here. Maybe if I can get my mouse to work. Let me bring myself back in here. All right. So what you're going to want to do is one project at a time. You cannot, if you're already having organizational issues, it's because you can't keep them going in your head. And I have this problem all the time because I have different stories pop into my head constantly. I'm constantly thinking, oh, that would be a good story. Oh, that would be a good story. Things like that. That's why I tend to keep a journal on me all the time. I have several around me at any given point. There's 2 or 3 on my nightstand. There's a couple in my truck. There's one in my wallet. That kind of thing. I keep track of story ideas. And because my mind's constantly racing and going, I have to do this organizational thing. But because I already have a problem with organization, it doesn't behoove me to do more than one at a time. I'm going to get lost. I'm going to get cross-contaminated. I'm going to have things that I'm thinking about for this other story in with the spreadsheet for this story. So keep that in mind as well. You can buy programs like Script Editor or Story or other things like that. There's even some free software out there that you can use. But I mean, ultimately, you're going to end up using Word eventually. Even if you don't now, you will eventually end up using Microsoft Word. Use the free stuff. I've used WordPerfect, other things. Especially if you get to the point where you're doing a novel. I normally assume when people are talking to me about writing and telling a story, they're talking about a novel. That's what most people do. I do short stories so that I can convert my writing and express myself in the YouTube format. And soon I'll be, for every audio story I do, I'll probably do 2 to 3 stories, including that one on Substack as just a written form. So there you go. But you have to subscribe to Substack, and that costs money. And believe me, I know how hard the economy is right now, and I'm not asking anybody to do that. It's just something I wanted to do to get my written word out. and people could see that as opposed to hearing me do voices. At any rate, that being said, there are lots of different things in Word. You get Office at $69 a year for one person, and you've got Excel already. And with Excel, you can you can build those kind of programs. You even have, if you have that version, you have access, you can build a database around it. It's just how far do you want to go? Here is the standard warning that you need to know. It's just like I tell people, do not write by hand in a journal your story, because you will focus on how pretty it is instead of what your content is. That's why I use Courier New. That's the standard format for submissions. That's the way it's always been. Just like I always put 2 spaces after a period, because that's the way it's bloody always been. Okay? You kids, you're woke enough. You don't have to go changing rules too. Okay? That is how you submit stories in Courier New, double spaced. That's just the way it is. 12 points. Format. Done. All this other new garbage, whatever. The people who still make the decisions are the old time people in that office, in the publishing houses, in the agencies. Okay. Whatever. It's just like DIE, it has a good intention and gets all blown out of proportion. But anyway, so you when you use those free programs and you're writing a novel, I always tell people have 2 versions. You have a version that is section by section or chapter by chapter. You have a folder with your story, section by section, chapter by chapter. But you also have a running manuscript. That being said, when you have a running manuscript, if you get close to 100,000 words or so, that running manuscript will start to degrade in the free softwares. I've had people argue with me all day long and all night long that it never happened to them, but it has happened to me every single time in my running document. If I tend to get over, I don't know, 110 pages or so, the free version of Word, the open Word, open whatever, it corrupts fast, easy, whatever. So just use Word. That way, if it does break, you got somebody to blame, like Microsoft, instead of it's free. So what can you say? But I've lost whole sections of novels that way. That's why I say keep one document that's chapter by chapter, and keep one document that's a running document. But do not, when you're writing out stuff on the page, you tend to focus on how pretty it is. Okay. The second thing is that when you think about organizing, you can get lost in the organization and never write the story. Especially it happens with plotters. They get so caught up in doing the outline and keeping track of what their characters look like and the organization, and those are the folks that tend to buy this program and that's not good enough, so I need note cards and this and that, and that you'll get lost in it and you'll never write a story. I've seen it happen so many times. So let's make sure that that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do as much as organization as we need to tell the story. But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, it's about the story. Just sit down and write. I mean, if you're going to focus on one thing at a time, you can write without the organization. But I've tried to give you some examples of what I do. That's not, going to break the bank, or gonna have to go pay somebody for a book to tell you the same stuff in the end. You know, it's like watching those videos about here are 3 simple things you can do, and watch my free video to find out. And it's a 45-minute video, and the 3 things are at the very end that you can't scroll. It's ridiculous. I want to see better stories. I want to see better movies. I want to read better books. And the only way that's going to happen is if we do it. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. As always, if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. Remember, your life is your story. Try and make it a great one.